This is The Space Shot, episode 310 for March 20th, 2018. The Centennial series, episode 1, Red Canyon, my conversation with Barry Hamilton. I'm John Molnix. First off, a quick update on my recording location for today. I apologize for any background audio or kids screaming. I'm hanging out at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and I've got a great view of the snow-covered Rocky Mountains and downtown Denver. This room just isn't the best for audio. Yesterday, I was at the state capitol in Colorado for Aerospace Day, and it was wonderful meeting and speaking with so many people in the space community. Sadly, it was too loud, and there were too many echoes to get good audio at the event, so I'm not going to share any of that audio here. Instead, I've got part 1 of my wide-ranging conversation with Barry Hamilton, CEO of Red Canyon Engineering and Software. We talked about aerospace, women in STEM, Colorado, the origin of his company, entrepreneurship, and more. Be sure to come back tomorrow for the second part of our conversation. You don't want to miss it. Now, let's get to that conversation. Today I'm talking with Barry Hamilton, CEO of Red Canyon Engineering and Software. Welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, John. Thanks for having me.
So this is the first of what I'm going to be calling the Centennial series of episodes, since Colorado's the Centennial state. We're going to be talking with people in the aerospace industry in Colorado, students, teachers, luminaries in the industry. So thank you for being first.
You're welcome.
So talk to me about the origins of Red Canyon. Why Colorado and why aerospace?
Well, let's start with the name. So Red Canyon comes from the Red Canyon that we spun the company out of, which was Lockheed Martin Waterton Canyon, right down the street from Red Rocks Amphitheater. And so kind of that hogback, we called it the Red Canyon. And then also we were working on the Mars missions. So the Mars 98 missions, which both crashed, we can go into that later. The Mars 01 missions, which were going to the Red Canyons on Mars. And so that's how I came up with the name.
That's a pretty cool, between Red Rocks and Mars, those are two pretty stunning geologic features. So it's a great way to name it.
Right.
So you had mentioned earlier when we were talking, you're a Colorado native.
Correct. Talk
a little bit about your backstory. How did you get into aerospace? Especially for the students, we have a lot of students that listen to the podcast. Mm-hmm. How did you get to where you are now? Talk a little bit about your journey.
Sure. So, I grew up in Colorado Springs on the east side. Came from humble beginnings. I remember for the first 6 years of my life, we lived in a trailer park. My parents had me when they were very young. My mom, in fact, was 17 when she had me. And so I watched my parents, working hard. My father was a teacher, high school teacher. My mom was working as a waitress, working her way through college at UC Colorado Springs. And then she eventually, became an engineer at Hewlett-Packard, and I kind of watched her rise through the ranks as a woman, which was fantastic. It's why I'm very proactive on women in engineering and getting more women in engineering and all diversity into engineering. It's good to have all those different viewpoints. But my mom, being a geek and an engineer, would always have the Apollo missions on. So I was born in 1967, so I don't exactly remember the first mission in 1969, but I'm sure it was on. I'm sure I was running around the trailer, like a little Indian. And then I remember, as I think the final mission was in 72 or 73, I remember those vividly in us, and we had moved into a new house at that final mission, and we got a big new fuzzy black and white TV. And ever since then I wanted to be an astronaut. And so that was my goal. So I was accepted into both the Naval and Air Force academies. I played football in high school at Mitchell High School, and my goal, and the reason I went to the Air Force, was to become a pilot, hopefully fighter, and then get enough hours then to be a mission or a pilot for the shuttle, and that didn't turn out. And that's when I hit some diversity, and so got a little rough while I was at the Air Force Academy.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you took that adversity and put it to your benefit. I think your longer term. How did it? How did you get through those school years then? I mean, because there's a lot of students around the country that if they're going to school and they're not certain about something, or if they might have a rough patch when they're going through freshman year, sophomore year. How did you deal with that? I mean,
it was so tough. And so the reason I ended up in Colorado Springs is my grandfather was at Fort Carson.
Okay.
And he fell in love with Colorado Springs when he was stationed there. So that's how my mom's side of the family ended up there. And so I knew if I left the Air Force Academy, it would disappoint him. It would disappoint my parents. But since my whole family was in Colorado Springs, I had that infrastructure while I was there for my first 2 years. That helped me get through it. Like, I remember at 6 months, I told my dad, I was like, I don't know if I can, get through this. I don't know if I'm cut out for this. Obviously I wasn't, but he's like, well, I think you should give, your first year a chance. And then once I got through my first year, I was like, well, I might as well go at least one more year and get everything paid off. Cause I had my computer. We were the first class to get computers, like 286 PCs
oh man,
were issued to us. And so we had to pay for that. They paid us to go there, but we had to, through our monthly checks, we had to pay for all of our uniforms and supplies and materials. So I decided to stay one more year. I injured my left knee. I had an ACL tear, and so that was during freshman ball. And so I had my surgery in, I think, January, February of my freshman year. So that added to the adversity that I had, and so I found that I was not pilot qualified due to some eye issues while I was there.
Okay.
And so kind of my long-term and short-term goals, playing football, going on the path to being an astronaut and a pilot, were just not working out for me. So that's when I decided to take what's called stop out, where you can leave for a year, you go into the reserves, and you can basically kind of do what you want. A lot of guys would take military planes and travel all over the world. I decided to go to CU, see what regular college life was like.
Yeah.
Enrolled in, the aerospace engineering degree and give that a shot.
So, I mean, CU, for everybody that lives in Colorado, we know that CU is a big aerospace school.
Absolutely.
And even around the country. Talk to me a little bit about your experience there when you were a student.
Well, so I was taking 22 semester credit hours at the Air Force Academy, playing football, doing the military thing, getting yelled at. And when I went to CU, I was taking, I think, between 15 and 18. So I felt like I just freed up about 40 hours a week.
Probably.
And I wasn't sure what to do with it. So one thing I was able to do was study a little bit more. And so it just seemed easy to me. And not that the CU program is easy, because it's not the aerospace program, but it was just easier for me. And I got in some study groups, in the engineering department, which was great. So I was building camaraderie, and I felt free. And it was the right choice for me. And I knew that after a year, when the letter came back from the Air Force on, coming back, it was the hardest decision I ever had to make. I chose not to go back, and I still have dreams about going back to the Air Force Academy. I'm like, I made a mistake. I need to come back. I have my old uniforms and I'm wearing them in. I'm sneaking in. It's bizarre.
Well, CU, where did you go from there then? I mean, it wasn't all over at CU, obviously. So internship programs, like what opportunities did you have there?
So, I had to work my way through school, and I applied at the Center of Astrophysics and Space Astronomy for an undergrad research position. And just great experience. I think I was making $8.15 an hour, you know, but hey, that was good rent money and beer money.
Exactly.
And I was learning so much. Dr. Gita Domick was my professor, and she was great. And she said we would have like weekly lunches. She's like, bring your lunch in, and we're gonna, you know, just go out into the terrazzo and you know, have lunch and talk. And she eventually got me into some grad image processing, and that's kind of where I also started my passion for programming, because I was doing these what's called Fourier transformations of new stars. So it's getting this astronomical data of brand new stars, and then doing these mathematical manipulations on them to determine the characteristics of them. So
That sounds like a pretty cool grad student
Yeah.
experience, or just even undergrad experience.
yeah, it was fantastic. And then, so my parents at this point were in Palo Alto, and I wanted to go out. So one summer I was a Pepsi truck driver. And then one summer I got an internship with Ford Aerospace, which is now Loral Aerospace. And then that's kind of why I eventually went, after I graduated, out to Lockheed Missiles and Space in Sunnyvale.
So your experience there, I mean, with a bigger company like Lockheed, how did that inform what you're doing now with the small business? Or small business, I say that with air quotes for everybody that's listening.
Well, it's a small business, probably not a micro business, but definitely small. So, you know, what I learned at Lockheed is they have amazing people. They have these huge programs, and they have this level of hierarchy of, you know, management, you know, and obviously as a young engineer, I'm kind of focused on technical and solving problems. I learned that I probably was not going to be able to be successful kind of rising through those ranks. You know, there's a lot of not only technical stuff, but political and, you know, jockeying for those positions. And I kind of just wanted to solve technical problems and have the best, most efficient solution to whatever it is, whether it's a launch vehicle, getting us to Mars with a robotic spacecraft. And so, although I cherish my time at Lockheed, both as an employee, as a consultant prior to Red Canyon, and you know, as a principal of Red Canyon, I just knew that that's not how my makeup was going to be successful in the industry.
Well, that kind of ties into your experience as an entrepreneur now too.
Right.
I mean, you have a lot of, I don't want to call them side hustles because they're all big things, but
well, not hustles.
So I mean, that's kind of the thing where you're almost stifled in a, you know, in certain circumstances. So you really took what you knew you wanted to do, what your skill set was, and you translated that into Red Canyon.
Right.
So talk about some of your first projects then for Red Canyon, because there's been a couple, I mean, big ones over the years. If you could just go over those.
Yeah. Well, you know, just a little bit about the entrepreneurship thing. So I had my own lawn mowing business in high school, and I would borrow my dad's truck for free. So my operating costs were pretty low.
Nice.
And I borrowed his lawnmower. So my capital costs were pretty low. But, you know, I'd go out and I had, you know, bowling alleys and, you know, single family residences. And, you know, I was making probably $25 an hour tax free. So that was pretty good.
Not bad. Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that. I had that work ethic to go do that on my own to kind of build my client base. And when I moved, I wanted to buy a house out in Silicon Valley when I was working for Lockheed, you know, but I think I was making around, I started at $26,000 a year, and then I was up to 30, I think, by the time I was about to leave. I couldn't afford a house out there, but when I got back here and I had changed positions to a company called Advanced Systems Engineering, which is kind of like a Red Canyon. I was like, oh, cool, I can go buy something. So that's when I bought my first fourplex in 1986.
Okay.
And so I lived in one, and I rented out the other three to buddies of mine. And that was kind of the start of my my real estate portfolio, and I would do that on the weekends. So I was at Hughes at the time working on classified programs. And I was down, I was in Offutt at Offutt Air Force Base for a while. I was at Schriever Air Force Base for a while, and then I was out across from Buckley for a while. And, on the weekends, I would pick up a hammer and a paintbrush, and I used to change out the water heaters, and so I did everything myself. And so that was actually kind of my first entrepreneurial venture.
That you got a taste for it there, and that really translates into anything. Once you start doing the work for yourself, no matter what it is, you realize there's a lot you can do.
You're looking at profit and loss and capital costs and operating expenditures and time, allocation, scheduling, budget. So kind of moving forward, it was 1999, and my company, ASE, Advanced Systems Engineering, got bought by a company called Cyber, CIBER, and they were doing this big roll-up of all these little aerospace engineering firms to try to create a big aerospace company, not as big as Lockheed, but pretty big. Mm-hmm. And I think at the time ASE had 280 employees. I was like their 34th employee, and now they were at 280. And so Bob Holmes was the principal. He sold that. But Lockheed could not continue the contract with Cyber that I was on. And I think I was the only employee over at Lockheed Martin at the time. This was at the time I was working on the entry, descent, and landing software for Mars 98. And so my boss, Rick Kasuda, came to me, and he's like, I don't think you're gonna, we were good friends, and gone on camping trips together, and so we knew each other fairly well. And so he knew that I probably wasn't interested in going direct and being an employee again with Lockheed, because of some of the things I had mentioned before. Yeah. So he was the person that gave me the opportunity to start my own company, and that one was called Priority Data Systems. That was in 1999. So it was just me. I was just like a consultant, still working on the Mars missions at that time. We were working on Stardust, which we launched in 98. We were working on Mars 01, Odyssey is what that one's called. That one's still going. And then the one that went to the sun and then brought the solar particles back, and it crashed in the desert. The name will come to me.
Trying to think of that one.
But so I was working on that, and then in 2000, Rick again came to me, and he had two other folks that I knew very well, Michelle Miller and Steve Karmer, and he wanted us to kind of all come together. So we all three came together at that time to start Red Canyon Software. And so that's still, we're working Mars 01, we're working Stardust. We were still working Mars 01 lander, but that one eventually got scrapped by NASA because of the crashes that we had on Mars 98. And so that's when we stopped that program, but that eventually became Mars Phoenix, which then launched in 2006.
Yeah, that was not a good time for Mars missions.
Oh yeah, so that was that story. That's a lessons learned story. So when we were approaching Mars for Mars 98, the lander, I was working with all the JPL PhDs, aerodynamicists, running Monte Carlo simulations in our STL software test lab. I was literally sleeping in there because we were running these sims, and I wanted to be watching them and understanding what was going on. And then I'd hop on the phone and go over the results with them to make sure that we were coming in where we wanted to, right angle of attack, right area for where we wanted to land. And then it landed, and then we heard crickets, silence. And I remember Steve Jolly, who's still a good friend. He's chief engineer over there at Lockheed now. He's like, we haven't heard anything back. We're still trying. and it was just agonizing not hearing anything from either satellite back then. But we learned so much, from that failure. Learning how to test better, how to communicate better systems engineering. A failure like that, although there was some software issues, is really a programmatic, failure. And since then, every single mission has been successful. Knock on wood.
Well, I mean, the entry descent, the EDL phase of any mission is always a nail biter. So I couldn't even imagine what it would be like to expect to hear something and then not have anything.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, it was tough. And Genesis is the one I was thinking about that brought the solar particles back. And speaking of another failure, so when that came in, it came in on a parachute, and we were supposed to use a helicopter with a hook to grab it, and it missed. And it ended up in pieces on the Utah desert floor, but they were able to extract a vast amount of great science from it still. So
that's good.
Credit to the scientists for being able to do that.
Resurrecting things from the crash. That's always
that's where the scientists are helping the engineers out, right?
Exactly. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check back tomorrow so you can hear the second part of today's episode. I had a great time interviewing Barry, and I'm looking forward to sharing part 2 tomorrow. I'd be incredibly grateful if you could share the podcast with your friends and family. Tag one of them and let them know about your favorite episode. I'd also appreciate it if you could venture into the Apple Podcasts app or your podcast app of choice and leave a review for The Space Shot. A steady stream of reviews helps ensure that The Space Shot is more visible in the Apple Podcasts app. As always, the show notes have more information on today's episode. You can hit me up on Instagram and Twitter. Find me at John Molnix. I'm always up to chat. You can also connect with me on Facebook. Just search The Space Shot or click the link in the show notes and you'll find me. I'm John Molnix, and I'll catch you on the flip side.